Hello everybody and welcome to Dwarf Fortress, one of the deepest fantasy world simulations ever created, focused on building fortresses for tiny little alcoholic gentlemen and their cohorts. Dwarf Fortress is known for its insane scale and deep simulation, which always presents interesting situations when played outside of the normal standard settings. By default, when you build a fortress in this video game, the player is awarded with 4x4 tiles, giving the player a total of 16 to build within. This leads to pretty large maps, and some players from time to time feel the need to go even larger, which of course impacts the game's performance. But it does provide for sprawling megascapes to be sculpted to the player's desire. But for this fortress, I decided to buck that trend ever so slightly, and instead of building a large fortress to explore the expansive histories of the world provided for me by the video game, I thought I would shrink it down to the smallest possible size. This means that I will be limited to just one single tile, which fits inside of my monitor quite nicely. This will allow me to direct my rapidly atrophying brain cell count at what I think is going to be the most important aspect of this fortress. You see, the goal here is to create a necromancer outpost, a coven of the wretched and rejected cultures of this world. The kings of the undead once reigned supreme over this place, at least until they were rejected by the kings and queens of the lands where they resided, and were forced out by many dwarven and human armies. But of course the tomes containing the knowledge of necromancy still continued to exist, and were ripe for the taking. It just simply required a singular brave adventurer, some knowledge of the surrounding landscape, and the bravery, or stupidity, to go and collect those damned tomes. So sit back and relax and smooth out your brain wrinkles, because this is the Fortress of Brainrot, a place for the rejected and the strange, the dishonest and the disloyal, a fortress built on anguish and agony and destruction. All those who live here will soon be dead, and anyone who dares to visit, friend or foe, shall inevitably join them. After completely ignoring the in-game warning about the smallest map making it hard to find resources, I got to work. Since I was expecting to make this a fortress of scholars focused around a library and copying books, I decided we didn't need any renewable food supplies. Seeds be damned. I had more important things I wanted to spend those embark points on, mostly paper, and lots of it. Once that task was completed, I went about setting up my dwarves and their specialized skills. Of course, they all needed some points in reading and teaching. And apparently, teaching doesn't get you anything other than peasant status. Well, that's unfortunate. After settling on the name Brainrot for the fortress itself, and naming the local government the Bloated Baker of Cooks, I embarked on my new, tiny fortress. However, my next steps were not the usual. Generally, from here, you would go about building a fortress. Well, I didn't do that. That would have been for somebody other than me. Instead, I hit escape and retired the fortress before even unpausing the game. Once the game had finished saving, I started a new game in adventure mode. Now, in Dwarf Fortress, when you retire a fortress, everything stays as is. Nothing is touched by the game itself, unless it's invaded. And while that could happen, it's not the most likely. So immediately retiring the fortress just kind of leaves it where it was when I started. When I start an adventurer, I can create a party containing whatever I want. And I decided to go with a human, specifically a human outsider, because there's a quirk with human outsiders. The first is they can start literally anywhere in the world, including your own brand new fortress. But it also does not restrict them on what they can bring with them to a given embark, meaning any animal that exists in the world that could theoretically be tamed can be brought with as a already tamed pet. After setting up my adventurer's stats and filling out my armor and reading all about her personality, I began the adventure, with 14 gremlins, 2 giant king cobras, 2 giant crabs, and 2 rattlesnakes. I thought it would be fun to embark in a dwarven fortress, which you cannot normally embark in at the beginning of an adventure, due to them being kind of hard to escape from. Just a few moments later, I was able to make my way up to the surface and exit the dwarven fortress. After collecting a couple books for reading on the journey, I made my way to the fortress of brainrot. Now, I could have started directly in brainrot, but I had a side activity that I wanted to get to first. We stopped at a mysterious palace, and while everybody was sleeping, we snuck inside and collected some strange jugs filled with mysterious liquids. These are healing potions that, when consumed, will completely recover any known wounds. And miraculously, even things like drowsiness and exhaustion. Since everybody in the mysterious palace was asleep, we were able to make it a quick heist, and quickly scampered away, and finished our quick little journey to Fortress Brainrot. Once we arrived, we introduced ourselves, and I retired the adventurer party. Once the retirement was complete, I scrolled through my active worlds to start a new game. It placed me on the overworld map. I clicked on the unretire/reclaim button and reclaimed Brainrot. And with all that done, we can get to work properly. Between the starting 7 dwarves, 2 crabs, 4 snakes, and 14 gremlins, we're gonna run out of food really quickly, because it turns out gremlins eat dwarven food, and also specifically only food that contains meat, making them about as obnoxious as that guy in high school who only ate pepperoni on his pizza. I'll never forget you, Jeff. Mediterranean is far superior. Now you might be thinking to yourself, but Mr. Video Maker, the goal is necromancy, right? Wouldn't starving to death be a positive? Yes, I'll get to that. And I'm sure we'll use plenty of starvation as a form of unexisting living creatures so that we can relive them as zombies. But first, we need to get underground. So we best start digging, at least right after I get to know a few of our starting dwarves. Some of the gremlins managed to get injured somehow during the adventure on the way here, which is very unfortunate, but most of them made it here intact, and some of them even deserve nicknames. They have their own little personalities and quirks, and we'll be able to do some basic tasks once they officially join the fortress, which will take about a year. It's going to be a lot for our manager Darius to manage. Thankfully, they dream of mastering a skill. It's probably going to be middle management or kitten herding. We even named one of the gremlins Kevin. Kevin knows what he did. It also turns out that the most popular god in the fortress is Kun, the Cat of Rumors, who happens to be the god of death and the stars. Very Cthulhu, and oddly fitting for a fortress such as this. Oh well, enough of the exploring, best get digging. Almost immediately the ceiling starts to drip. This is an aquifer, which isn't too difficult to get through. It just requires manually reassigning the dig points. And in the case of these sand walls, filling them up with some sort of blocker to stop the water from flowing. Once we get deep enough and hit some stone, we'll just be able to smooth the walls. But knowing my own stupidity and hubris, I decide to make some blocks instead, so that I can dig out the stone walls and have a much more uniform looking setup with these pretty sandstone bricks. However, the water is actually flowing fast enough that this is becoming a bit of a liability, but what's life without a little bit of risk, eh? Honestly, I think everything is going pretty well. Just do not look at the food supply. Once I reach these nice purple dolomite layers, we've reached the bottom of the aquifer, because as I dig through these moist walls, the drier portions behind reveal themselves. I will also note that it's a good idea to be a couple layers below the bottom of the aquifer when you're digging, because otherwise the ceilings will continue to dribble, and it will eventually fill up your fortress unless you have sufficient drainage. Now, because this map is so small, we're going to have to take full advantage of the space available, and I want this fortress to be at least somewhat defendable. Thankfully, this fortress actually was recorded and took place before that siege update. Terrifying. So we won't need to worry about the enemies digging into the fortress, but we will have to be concerned with threats from the surface, because the enemies are rather close by, and there will probably be a lot of them. Of course, these red squares indicate hostile places. But for right now, our biggest threat is food. So we should get to that. As I start to get a little stockpile area set up, I assign what little food and drink we have in a stockpile. I also build a few of our starting workshops, and continue to dig. Hopefully we will find the caverns, and hopefully they will be empty. They will be very small, but they'll have a supply of food for us. I need to acquire seeds in order to feed these dwarves, which will require harvesting fresh plants from the underground. Thankfully, the process didn't take too long. The first cavern was located on layer -11. We started on layer 7, so that's only 18 layers down. Nice and shallow. So I quickly got to work and dug out a stairwell so the dwarves have access. Once completed, I placed some doors in the way just in case something scary comes running at us. Well, it might be able to break down the doors, at the very least it'll give us some notice, like this crocodile here. A single cave crocodile in 1v1 combat against an unskilled dwarf could kill somebody, and now it's entered my stairwell. Thankfully, it decided to be a little scaredy cat, and it walked away after noticing that our stairwell's scary. I'm a little concerned about this, so I'm going to have the dwarves stay inside and hope it leaves for the time being, while I get some cage traps prepared. The coast does seem to kind of be clear, but I still have a little bit of food left, so I'm going to cross my fingers for the moment, and use this time to dig out a little bit more space for the beginnings of the fortress. But, much to my dismay, more problem have arrived. In this case, it's a troll. We still need food before we can begin the undead science. Perhaps it might actually be time to start a military after all. But currently the focus is traps, and I do have my first few constructed. Maybe it'll wander over this way. And just as I was starting to genuinely panic, as we were completely out of food and drink, the trade caravan arrived. Thank the mountain homes. Let's get to trading. I order up a bunch of gems to be cut, and in exchange for a pile of gems, I purchase everything that they have. Whew, well that's a load off. Look at all of that food and drink. Much better. Now we can actually get back to building this fortress with a little bit less stress, now that the gremlins aren't threatening an uprising. However, they seem to have gotten a little bit upset. That's fine. They'll be dead soon enough, and so will the rest of us. And just as I was starting to calm down, well, not everything was fine and dandy. You see, a jaguar apparently was up on the surface and it attacked the traders, who honestly didn't seem to mind all that much, all things considered, but it will speed up their departure, so it is a good thing that we got our trading done quickly. The good news is it seems that our cages down below are actually doing something of use. We've caught ourselves a cave toad. That can be butchered, but that cave crocodile is still loose. That's gonna cause me some grief someday, isn't it? No matter. We have to keep digging and organizing and preparing for a proper fortress. And just as I was starting to get into the swing of things, I see more combat notifications. It appears that one of the gremlins is fighting alongside of my manager. What actually was happening was there was a bunch of vultures on the surface that decided to just attack anything that was walking around, which is weird, because vultures aren't even that aggressive. But it turns out they don't like gremlins, or dwarves, or something. So the result is there is now a bunch of dead vultures on the ground. The traders have left fully, and I think I can butcher them, so maybe that's good? Our brave adventurer, who we brought to the fortress initially with all of the gremlins, also doesn't seem super thrilled about the situation. Thankfully, they still have their crossbow equipped. Hopefully this doesn't upset them too much. During the chaos, we also managed to catch that cave crocodile, and I was able to get it trained up a little bit. I'm sure more will show up sooner than later, but thankfully, that's some crocodile nom-noms that we'll be able to construct with that. While I was recording this, live on stream, it seems like my audience was very interested in the gremlins, and so more of them required nicknames. And honestly, I'm not surprised that this gremlin is sometimes cruel, and finds a chaotic mess preferable to the boredom of harmonious living. I'm sure that you'll get along here just fine. Alright, well, short people, get back to work! We've got some new migrants arriving, so that means fresh hands, and extra bodies for the future. So let's make some bedrooms. Thankfully, we won't need too many, because we won't be sleeping once we're dead. While I was distracted, designating digging places, it seems the crabs got into a tussle with a bunch of troglodytes that just rampaged in from the underground. How unfortunate. It does seem that the crabs were able to hold their own for the most part, but we had to do a little bit of helping. I may actually just lock the door to these caverns now that we have a food supply, because they're turning out to be a bit of a bother. And after that incident with the vultures, I've decided to move my trade depot underground, because that combat with the vultures actually forced the caravan to leave early, and they abandoned all of their supplies, meaning I get all of the stuff that they brought for free, as well as the stuff I sold them back. The problem is this will negatively impact my relations with my home faction, which is bad in the long run, but for right now is fine, I guess. We'll have to explain that to them next year. Oh well, best get back to construction. Oh god, more troglodytes! Can't a dwarf catch a break here? I'm already trying to unexist myself, I don't need your help. This round of underground mongrels actually killed one of my dwarves. A damn shame. And unfortunately it was Darius. the manager and expedition leader of the fortress, one of the founding 7. They died so quickly that their body will surely rot before we have the time to acquire a fancy book and re-alive them. I also wouldn't want to do that right now, because there's some quirks with necromancers. You see, while these dwarves are busy digging out this lair, I think it might actually be not a bad time for me to tell you something very important. You see, when a necromancer is in combat, they have the ability to resurrect dead body parts and bodies, bringing them back to life. But they also have several other very specific skills. Skills that they've learned after a very long and boring career of being undead and living forever and unable to sleep and drink. Skills that let them make nightmares that kill dwarves and me. So what am I talking about here? Well, first, necromancers can create undead. They can create intelligent undead that can be recruited into your fortress, but they can also create nightmares. Now, nightmares kill anything that feels fear. Anything that is alive feels fear. This includes necromancers, meaning they could summon a giant monster that would kill them. So even if I did have the ability to resurrect this dwarf right now, it would be a really bad idea to try and incite a combat event to cause them to resurrect this dwarf, because it would probably just immediately kill most of the population of the fortress. So we have to be careful when we do begin resurrecting things. Besides, I don't even have a necromancer book yet, so it's going to take me a minute. Back to the fortress. The troglodytes just kind of continued piling in, and so all I really could do was lock the doors and continue working on the fortress itself. I needed some sort of structure and some way to sort out the now rapidly descending mood happiness levels, so I decided to be a little sneaky. I dug a little drainage tunnel and then channeled into the aquifer around the staircase. I then placed grates at the bottom of the staircase above the drainage tunnel, which probably won't ever get deep enough that it'll be a danger anyways, but I figured this would just look a little bit better. Then I allowed the water to fall down my stairwell. Now, why would I do this? Well, it turns out when dwarves, or almost any living creature in Dwarf Fortress for that matter, is near water mist, they get a happy thought. One of the fastest ways to fix moods in Dwarf Fortress is by simply providing them with mist. Unhappy moods and unhappy dwarves are unproductive dwarves. And very unhappy dwarves are murderous dwarves. So we need to try and balance out the chaos here with some nice, pleasant waterfalls. We don't need anybody going insane before I even have the ability to do the undeath science. So, alongside of my little bedroom layer here, I extend that mist waterfall down through the bedrooms, so they will get even more water falling past them. Once all these tasks are complete, I gain a little bit of confidence back and decide to focus my attention back on these troglodytes. Since most of them were in cages, my solution was pretty straightforward. I placed some cages in the corner of the map next to a pasture and assigned the troglodytes to them. Once the troglodytes had been moved to the upper level, I then transfer them to the pasture and remove them from the pasture. They then leave off of the edge of the map. Generally, what creatures from the caverns are trying to do is just get to the surface anyway and leave, so this just seems to speed the process up a little bit. As for things down in the fortress, the giant king cobras have made and fertilized 28 eggs. I look forward to there being a wriggling army of giant cobra babies in my fortress. And I will need somewhere to put them, so I figured manipulating the surface into a bit of a snake pit would be a bit of fun, if I could make it work. Once the babies were born, I transferred the majority of the males to the upper level, leaving the breeding pair and some of the babies down below. And since I was getting a little bit frustrated with these troglodytes, I figured I would test out the snake pit with a troglodyte. So I threw one of the troglodytes in, and it went about as well as you'd expect. After getting bit and having poison injected in it, the troglodyte was paralyzed and simply lay on the ground suffocating until they died to giant king cobra poison. Lovely. While I was working on the entry tunnel and caged setups, a surprising thing happened. We discovered, unexpectedly, another cave layer. When you're chopping down a tree in Dwarf Fortress, it removes the ground layer. This is sort of like chopping off the grass in Minecraft, and apparently literally directly below the first cavern layer was another cavern layer. So we've got two very close together, and it's completely filled with Ruthrers, a gigantic family of them. While these creatures are quite docile, letting them into the fortress would be the equivalent of letting a herd of elephants or cattle into the fortress, so they could cause some havoc if left to their own devices. So once we dig into this area, we have to catch them in cage traps once more. Well, at least we know what to do. Thankfully, we now have a healthy supply of wood due to the surface being a desert and not having any wood in it whatsoever. We needed to chop down pretty much every single giant mushroom tree in this cave layer. But enough of that for now. We've got to keep digging. I need to find some lava. I would really like to use it to power my forges. So I let the dwarves continue digging. But before long, we found the final cavern layer, which was quite a bit deeper than the first two. But if we're gonna find magma, we're gonna have to keep digging. Unrelated, but the gremlin, Kevin, thinks he's funny. In fact, he claims to have mastered comedy, which I think is quite miraculous. I mean, I certainly haven't, so I'm glad somebody has. And after what felt like a very, very, very long period of time spent digging, I finally found some warm rocks. That means lava is close by. After a little bit of careful channeling, we discovered the magma sea, as well as a fancy wall studded with gems. Excellent. We'll be able to get some fancy secret metal later down the line. Once we're all unliving, of course. And I feel like I've said this a few times now, but space is still at a premium, so we best mine out as much of the layers as we can. This little tiny desert fortress of brainrot is actually starting to look habitable. Fancy that. If you remember a few minutes ago, I also mentioned that you should try and be a few levels below an aquifer so that you don't collide with it when trying to dig. Turns out I didn't actually go deep enough, and the edge of this layer is actually still aquifer. I may be able to do something about this later, but for right now I'm just going to kind of ignore it and prioritize digging out the layer below instead. The fortress is starting to look like it has a kitchen, and we are rapidly butchering the giant king cobras. Turns out they make for good food, as they are born at a rather large size. They also produce a large sum of eggs, so if we would like more food variety, we can harvest that as well. Same should go for the crabs, but they've been pretty badly beaten up and don't seem super interested in making more baby crabs, which is either unfortunate or good. I'm not sure yet. And the surface king cobras in the snake pit seem to be enjoying it so far. As far as the first cavern layer goes, that's been causing me so much of a headache, I've been building a little wall along at least one, maybe two edges of the caverns. This will stop animals from being able to enter the fortress. I would like to completely lock down at least one layer, or at least one portion of one layer, so that we'll have consistent access to both food and wood. Progress is slow, but steady. Another project that I've started up in the background here is pumps and water wheels. I'm building a little ditch here, which is going to run some water through it, and that water is going to turn some water wheels, which are going to power some pumps, so that I can move lava from the magma sea up to wherever I want it to be. The way I'm achieving this is by digging a trench that's deep enough that water can flow along it. And then, just above the trench, at the end, I'm digging this kind of diagonal pattern through the aquifer. I'm going to make this multiple levels tall, allowing as much water to flow in as possible. By the end, it should look something like this, over about 2 or 3 layers. Once completed, I smooth and fortify the end of the trench, which allows water to freely flow off the map. The best part about Fortress Brainrot is it truly is a test of everyone's stupidity. See this pile of corpses? Would you move in here? I don't know, these dwarves are. Welcome, newcomers. I need extra hands to help move the bodies up to the pile. I do know for a fact that it is better to live here than it would be to live anywhere else in this world. Just about every faction and every civilization that we know of is at war with one another, including us and opposing dwarven factions. So I guess now might actually not be the worst time to start seeking out some instructions on how to re-alive all of these unalives. So I'm sending a squad of gilded monks to go and explore a abandoned tower. This was once a great necromancer stronghold and probably has all of the supplies that we need to re-alive the dead. Shortly later, the dwarves returned with a handful of books. I did do a closer examination and none of them have turned out to be the one that we're looking for. So we'll have to keep running those in the background while I work on this water solution. Once the water begins to flow, I install a bunch of mechanisms along the edge of it, and I connect the necessary water wheels. This will produce quite a lot of power, but at the moment, I don't have much use for it, because I need to produce a bunch of pipes so that I can start building a pump stack in order to pump lava. So I'm just gonna kind of let this project sit for right now, because there's a dwarf I would like to introduce you to. This is a very sad giant cobra. His fangs got knocked out, so he needs to be moved from the murder pile into the breeding pile. I'm sure he'll have a much better time down there. But this dwarf who's leading him is of importance to the fortress. This is Zon, and Zon is the sacred skull of the fortress. Now, that might sound a little strange, but let me explain. The sacred skull is the religious leader for the denomination of moths. worshipping the god of death and stars, Kun, the cat, a dwarven god represented by a dwarf, who is dead. We recently established our first temple in this fortress. This was obviously something that the dwarves decided to do after our crusades of reclaiming the great dwarven knowledge of necromancy began. This is a positive tiding for the future of brainrot. The church also had some other orders, and in order to complete those requests from the church, we had to make some space. And the dwarves got to work, day and night, for weeks, clearing out an entire layer of rock. It was also clearly attracting new pilgrims, as many more dwarves were arriving at the gates of brainrot. Every day or so, the monks would leave and attempt to find more books, and the dwarves kept digging. And then the dwarves left once more, to continue searching for books, and the dwarves kept digging. Pumps were constructed so they could become self-sufficient with indoor farming, and the great construction continued. And the gods must have smiled upon the dwarves that day, as Besmer, the metal crafter, had been taken by a fey mood. The dwarves rejoiced as brainrot has been blessed. Besmer quickly moved and claimed the first and only metal forge in the fortress. This inspired the dwarves to increase the pace and continue digging. Besmer exclaimed that this was a message from the gods. They were clearly on track to achieve all of their goals. Constructions continued, and so did the raids. Besmer created a great figurine and offered it to the bloated baker of cooks. The dwarves would take this masterpiece and place it on a pedestal next to where they planned to store the great tomes with the knowledge of life and death, which of course was what they were seeking. And the good dwarf Zon smiled upon them. As for this thing that I'm building here, I'll explain a little bit more about how it works when it's done. But all that you need to know is when a dwarf dies, it usually requires some physical trauma. We want to minimize that, because physical damage to a creature's body means that they won't be as strong in the afterlife. We want able-bodied dwarves to pass out and die. So things are going to get a little dark soon. Just a bit of a warning. But let's just say it does include starvation and dehydration. Moving on, the living do need food, and our farming project is coming along quite well. Right next to the drainage of the creek where we are producing power, I used some pumps to pump water over into this little crevice, where I will build some farm plots once the water dries up, on top of the freshly tilled mud. I also should mention that it seems that our little stairwell waterfall trick has done its job. The moods and general happiness of the dwarves has improved significantly. Maybe that's also because there haven't been any very violent troglodyte invasions as of late, but I will just take all of the credit here. At the very least, public word must be quite positive because more dwarves are arriving and planning to move into the fortress, and the population of giant king cobras are exploding. At this rate, I should probably start a giant king cobra leather industry. I'm sure that'll make some swanky leggings and robes. Not that the gremlins will be able to wear them. They don't know how to wear clothes. Kevin doesn't seem to mind though, at least not too much. The dwarves seem to be pondering happy thoughts, such as Ice Blue, who's been thinking a lot about the creative impulse. Hopefully not while you're doing surgery there, good doctor.
Leg cramp.
Some time has passed behind the scenes, and I've put together some magma forges. We'll be using them to create iron pipes and corkscrews, which is what will become our pump stack. This is a dwarven method of moving liquids from one place to another, usually vertically, in very large quantities and speeds. We'll be using it to move lava from deep down below in the magma sea all the way up to wherever we need it to be. The dwarves were lucky enough to find a pretty large supply of lemonite while they were digging downwards. This, of course, is an ore of iron, which is lava-safe in Dwarf Fortress. Down beneath the lava forges, I prepared this little room, with a set of bars at the front. There was this little overhang in the lava down in the magma sea, and I channeled through it, allowing the lava to freely flow through the metal bars that I'd already prepared down below, safely providing a small and consistent power source for my forges. And then begins the long and arduous and slow and tedious task of designating every single layer in an alternating fashion to build some pumps. If you want a tutorial on this, I do have a quick tutorial. Simply put, you alternate holes in the ground so that power can move vertically upwards, and liquid can also move vertically upwards. It's not as complicated as it looks, I swear. It just takes a long time to put together and is often quite tedious. The dwarves don't seem to mind, however. In the center of the fortress, I've put together a tavern, as well as what is going to be a library in the future. We're going to need to be utilizing that to its fullest. But the fortress wasn't going to be calm forever. The forgotten beast, Nolthag, has come. A great feathered petrosaur. It has a pair of fan-like antennae, and it squirms and fidgets. Its eyes glow lime, and its golden yellow feathers are long and sparse. Beware its deadly dust. Deadly dust is one of those abilities that creatures can have that I fear most. We'll have to fight this with maximum precautions, or at the very least, medium-high precautions. Medium precautions. I've been quietly building a military in the background for a while now, and I do have some squads of crossbow dwarves. So after sealing off the entrance, I sent the dwarves down to the cavern battlements. And it wouldn't take long for the dwarves to take notice of the beast. At this point, it was just a matter of maintaining line of sight with the creature. And remember how I talked about precautions? Well, I probably should have maintained more precautions. I realized we had a problem. It had only let out one cloud of dust, and all of my soldiers were rotting. The very flesh on their bones was bruising, blistering, and melting off of their bones. I needed a hospital as soon as possible. Unfortunately, all I really had was a cluster of beds left in the middle of this partially smoothed hallway. Less of a hospital and more of a temporary triage setup. Thankfully, I had a few dwarves who were assigned to doctoring tasks and had some skills, albeit rusty, and they quickly got to work, using buckets of water to clean whatever dust they could off of the injured soldiers. Thankfully, the other dwarves would then clean up the piles of dust that landed on the ground, so it's unlikely that we'll have an epidemic on our hands. But situations like this can get out of hand quickly, especially when there's dwarves fighting and falling in piles of extract from unknown origins. As for the beast, we weren't able to kill it. It found its way into a stairwell that I'd prepared sometime earlier, and had made its way down to the lower cavern layer. Thankfully, it was also rotting from its own dust, which I think is a little bit ironic. As for that hallway, I was able to simply tell the dwarves to brick it up and make it inaccessible, and if I wanted to go down that far or that way, I would simply make a new route. This means the lowest and third cavern layer is now off limits. Thankfully, I have access to the other two. Due to the emergency nature of this situation, I figured it was time to accelerate progress on this fortress, because on the last raid that the dwarves completed, we had found something important, something meaningful to the future of this fortress. This is a scroll titled Mortality for Everyone, and when examined, it shares the secrets of life and death. It was obtained courageously by our brave exploratory squads, the Gilded Monks. And with it in our possession, all I had to do was select some prime dwarves. Saigon, for his relations to the fortress's mayor, a good friend in fact, was the first to take the book and read the entirety of the tome. Second was Kafit, the fortress's adventurer, who I brought at the beginning. Fortress management wanted to witness the transformation, so I placed some holes in the walls. And with that, 2 of the fortress's inhabitants had become necromancers. I suppose now is a time to explain how this machine works. You see these gremlins? Well, I would like to turn some of these gremlins into zombie gremlins, so I don't need to worry about feeding them anymore, alongside of a brave volunteer necromancer, because once undead, necromancers won't be killed by their own nightmares, which increases their strength significantly. I figured they would also make for a good test bed of this project. Now, in order for me to starve my dwarves, or in this case, gremlins and dwarves, I need to get them into a cage. Well, I don't need to, but I would like to get them into a cage, for one very important purpose. You see, bodies rot, and when they reach that point, they become unresurrectable. And there's a funny quirk with cages. If something dies in a cage, the body is set in stasis, and never actually rots. So while I could simply kill the dwarves or other characters by locking them in a room or drowning them, I then would be set on a timer wherein I would need to make sure nothing rotted by the time I resurrect them. And the way this machine is going to lock everything into cages is quite simple. Anything gets stuck in a cage if it's lying down or falls into it. This lever in the center of the room is connected to this pillar. This pillar is holding up one tile of flooring. Now, it might look like the tile of flooring is connected to this little walkway, but this grate here, or of course you could also use bars, isn't load-bearing. So when this lever is pulled, this tile of floor falls and it sends a shockwave through this small room, launching any flying living creature into these traps, which are equipped with cages. Once the cages have a character in them, I simply forbid the cage, and the character will inevitably starve to death, or die of dehydration, whichever comes first, with the body perfectly preserved for resurrecting. This will serve two purposes, the second of which is protecting my necromancers. This little walkway up in the top half of the room is going to be filled with a scary monster, such as a goblin, or a troll, or a beak dog, or a spider. It doesn't really matter, as long as it's something that is not friendly to my necromancers. So once I have a pile of bodies which I wish to resurrect, like in these two cages, where I have one of a dwarven necromancer and the other a gremlin, I simply need to put a scary thing into this section of the room, connect the lever to both the pillar in the center and the cage up in the top half, and connect the lever to those two cages containing the bodies. So simultaneously everything is released and the necromancer is launched into a cage. And any and all summoned nightmares won't be able to do damage to the living creatures that are caught in the cages, assuming some of them are still living. Moments later, the nightmares should dissipate and vanish in a puff of smoke. Let's see if it works. Honestly, that went better than I expected. Or at the very least, it's a partial success, which is better than a complete failure. Our living necromancer is safe inside of a cage trap. Our dead necromancer is now a lich, or an undead necromancer. The nightmares weren't able to do any damage, and worked exactly as I'd planned. The only hiccup here is the gremlin unfortunately didn't make it. Something I failed to account for is gremlins have the ability to release themselves from cages once they are undead, apparently, considering they can't do this while they are alive. So it just repeatedly released itself and kept getting smashed against the wall in the clouds of dust. While it may be possible for me to resurrect the gremlins outside of the cages without the drop mechanism, the current setup at the very least doesn't seem to be workable with creatures such as these. I'm quite happy with this setup. I think I'm going to have to expand it, at least once I get this pump stack done, because I require magma forges in the front of the fortress. And as I started putting my new renovation plans into motion and continued working on projects, the game had other ideas and sent another forgotten beast our way. This one has a poison bite. And while this is a significantly less scary threat than the previous, it's still a threat. And now I have dwarves that have the ability to summon giant murder monsters when they're startled. So I'm gonna have to take this very carefully. Time is of the essence. We must scramble the military. Hopefully the soldiers are quick, because this monster is moving at the speed of a zoomer on Adderall. And before I could even lock the dwarves in there with it, it makes its presence known, directly in the doorway to the fortress. Hopefully this goes well, or this could be pretty dangerous for the future of the fort. Thankfully, the dwarves were able to surround it, and after a few swift blows from a silver warhammer, destroyed its brain, causing the creature to die instantly. With an arm like that, a dwarf needs a fitting nickname. Consider yourself Thwack, the Wrestler. What a glorious dwarf. Definitely going to have a bright future, or at the very least a cold and lifeless and then breathless one, in a shambling husk. Thank you for your service, Cog. Now let's see what this thing tastes like. The next few months of the fortress were pretty calm. I mostly occupied my time by finishing off all of those projects I've been babbling about for most of the video. The farming, a lava reservoir, and a place for it to go. We even took the time to move the boulders out of the spillway that I had prepared. I just wanted things to look fancy. And so after what felt like literal years of in-game time, I was finally able to hook that power supply that I built out of that water up to the pump stack, constructed entirely from lava-safe materials, iron and dolomite. The machine works flawlessly, and quickly fills the fortress reservoir up with lava. I will have to remember to turn it off, though, so that nothing overflows. It's still early in the investigation. A potential mug goblin incident has been reported in Springfield, Illinois. Police called in for a wellness check on a couple who were last seen on New Year's Eve. Found their home filled to the brim with mugs, they said. When asked to expand on just how many mugs were found, the officers shrugged. Too many to count, they said. After excavating the house of mugs, all of them, empty and clean, the couple was not found within. Several investigations are underway, though the Eternal Investigations team are being tight-lipped about it. No report on what vessels they're drinking from. The team's official stance on this was a mug goblin was likely an innocent participant, and might have been coerced by the less-known and much more deadly plumber's kobold. A single lead-lined tankard found on the nightstand among all of the other mugs leads the most credence to this theory. We will update the investigation when more information is available. We plead with the public, do not seek out the mug goblin. The best thing is to fill your cabinets and cupboards with mugs to appease the mug goblins so they move on. Don't antagonize them.
To make sure that your mug goblin is satisfied, visit blindirl-shop.fourthwall.com to satisfy your mug goblin. This might be your last chance. Mug goblins are everywhere and cannot be avoided.
Don't risk antagonizing them or run the risk of encountering a plumber's kobold. You have been warned.
The next step is pretty simple. We need to recage, reload, and try again. One of the first volunteers was our adventurer, Kafet, who turned out to also be one of our early failures. Their spirit was so restless that they were moved into a ghost before I had the opportunity to resurrect them, something I hadn't considered. This stops them from being zombifiable. Rest in peace, great adventuring one. May your adventures continue in the next life. The third attempt was more successful, to a point. We got our first zombie gremlin, successfully not killed. However, he didn't seem super interested in actually doing anything, instead choosing to just kind of stand stationary, uninterested in our pathetic desires. Suit yourself, Grammy. And as far as I'm concerned at this point, the starvation shall continue until the number of zombies improve. So I begin to accelerate the process. Udil, who goes by the nickname Stormwolf, was so overworked he didn't even have time to replace his damaged clothing, truly committing to the task. As one of the earliest undead necromancers, he truly was perfect for the job. And as time goes by, more zombies are created, and I become more ambitious. With every resurrection ceremony, I increase the number of potential dwarves to resurrect. Best part about this system is dwarves don't actually know what's inside of a cage. So the only person who has to actually see dead bodies is the necromancer doing the actual resurrecting. Everybody else just sees empty cages. Little bit of time passes and the population drops, until it immediately grows once more as the spells of necromancy kick off. Not all of the intelligent undead will join the fortress, but most of them do. And as the weeks drag on, brainrot begins to populate itself with mindless, doom-scrolling zombies. And while only the necromancers can create more undead, no zombie feels fear and are thus safe amongst the nightmares. But necromancers can still be killed, and zombies can be disassembled. And a fortress this small is just one step away from absolute disaster. All that needs to happen is I need to forget to pause after an event happens. Such as this one, the Forgotten Beast. Zobu has come, a huge, scaly ape. It has a broad horn and it undulates rhythmically. Its copper scales are jagged and overlapping. Beware its deadly dust. I'll admit, I was a little bit spooked when this appeared, and after some clumsy keyboard fumbling, by the time I scrolled to it, it was already deep within the fortress hallways. I didn't have an option, so I sent in the military. I honestly expected this fight to last a bit longer. I thought that it would do more initial damage to the dwarves. The creature fell, seemingly as soon as the fight had begun, but we were not in the clear. What was the effect of that deadly dust? It wouldn't take long to become obvious. Spontaneous bleeding to death. In fact, I think that's what killed the beast as well. Like flies, they began to drop. In a panic, I made sure the dwarves could butcher the monster. and threw the bodies into the resurrection chamber on a pedestal. I was able to assign it directly using the display menu. The dwarves carried them up as soon as they could, and in my rush, I didn't fully set up the collapsing device. I just simply attempted to resurrect the zombies, but it was no use. None of them were intelligent undead. They were simply shambling husks. It was a 100% failure. Curse that beast. But it wasn't the first failure for brainrot. That would be Twitter. I mean, these happened all the time. Things just kind of started popping up dead, like this gremlin. Life kind of fell into a rhythm after this, at least until the next forgotten beast arrived. This one spooked me even more than the last, and I didn't want to risk another wall of dead dwarves, because it had webs. I didn't have much verticality in my fortress, so I knew fighting it would be difficult. I decided to do it the easy way instead, because it was very distracted by one of my doors. So I simply dropped a rock on his head, and that fixed the problem quite quickly. At this point, I decided I was just going to zombify everybody. I took all of the remaining, not unliving, dwarves in the fortress and locked them in the resurrection chamber.
Why would you do this?
And the starvation and thirst began.
Too hungry.
It was a weird collection of sorts. Some alive, some not. And those that were not were in varying levels of disrepair. I'm sure the complaining was loud.
This is awful.
Oh, shut up, you.
But I am feeling pleasure near this finely crafted cage.
I think I hate this.
Do you know who my father is?
Yeah, of course I do. Everybody does.
I'm starting to think.
Well, stop it then.
Please, have mercy.
Where was I? I let the dwarves engrave some artwork before they passed. This was kind of hard to watch, to be honest. Some of the dwarves were scrambling for food, anything that they could grab from the ground. Small animals, rats, mice, bugs. But eventually, the last few dwarves collapsed,
Bye.
and the resurrections began. With almost every dwarf in the fortress zombified, the dwarves turned their sights to the new and real enemy of the necromancers. To the southwest, there is a fortress known as Colorbeard, a fortress that made its name on the destruction of necromancy, a fortress that claimed to be the entertainment capital of all of the dwarven empires. Colorbeard was staunchly anti-necromancy. They were the first to begin the crusades against the necromancers and the undead, and their assaults were so devastating, the knowledge could have been lost to time. The dwarves of brainrot wanted revenge. And so began the invasions. Behind the scenes, more migrants arrived, and so some alive dwarves were in the fort once more. Many beasts fought down below, and the dwarves continued to siege. Alive or not, the economy continued to flow, and the dwarves continued to trade with the few remaining alive dwarves at the mountain homes. But many things became less of an issue for brainrot, such as forgotten beasts. Since the dwarves had recently discovered they had the ability to make things dizzy by simply gesturing and waving, they could topple any foe, as they were more or less incapacitated, assuming they were alive when the fights began. So with their newfound strength, the sieges continued, and they reclaimed the lower caverns. Remember this guy? The guy that damn near ended the fortress earlier on, with his deadly dust? Well, fortunately, zombies don't need blood, so he will be much less effective against them. The fight lasted a little bit longer than I expected, mostly due to the rubble being kicked around by the dust. But once they were able to get him locked in place, the creature fell apart and disintegrated like cotton candy in a dishwasher. Well done, heroes. Now get in the hospital so that we can cut off all of that rotting tissue. But things would never truly be calm in a fortress such as brainrot. I noticed some combat was happening with my second squad. Turns out one of my soldiers had wandered into the middle cavern layer and had encountered a blind cave ogre. It only took a few minutes for the rest of that squad to join them, and the fighting escalated almost as quickly as it began. Of course, several dwarves died, but were quickly resurrected, including Lanix the Handy, the armless Zambi, who's becoming quite the skilled kicker and biter in this fight. When situations like this happen, I just kind of give up trying to follow what's actually going on in the fight. The good news is it didn't really impact the frame rate, so I could just kind of let it run. It's very difficult to force dwarves to disengage. All you can really hope is that they eventually resurrect whatever they're fighting with as a neutral, intelligent undead, so that they stop attacking it. Otherwise, they'll just repeatedly execute them until they get bored. because it's not like they're gonna get tired. They don't need to sleep or eat. They're dead after all. The truly good part of a situation like this is because they're undead and they don't get tired, they will become legendary in every single combat skill rapidly. It'll also greatly increase their kill count and notoriety. In a world where this dwarf with no arms is simply kicking and biting its way to victory, I think that says enough about the state and strength of these dwarves. And regardless of whether or not the creature approaching the fighting is even a threat, such as this Crundle, the dwarves quickly execute and mangle until they can no longer resurrect it. I kind of thought the fight was starting to calm down as there was only one blind cave ogre left, and then the spider arrived, which, again, is pretty ineffective against the zombies. Poison isn't going to hurt an undead warrior, after all. And after the dwarves had finished ranking up a kill streak so high it would make a Call of Duty player drool, finally, the fighting calmed down, and the last remaining injured soldiers were carried to the hospital. At least the doctors are getting some very adequate training. It's hard to mess up when your subject is already technically dead. And the dwarves got some pretty incredible skills. I'm sure this will prepare us, including Lanix the Handy, for anything that could possibly happen. No siege will be able to stand up to an army such as this, even if there's only maybe a dozen of them. Between their spells of dizziness, their summons of nightmares, and their unbelievable skills, nothing will stand in their way. Well, except for maybe that. You see, dwarves still burn, even if they're undead. And the forgotten beast Laud, Lord of Destruction, blob composed of flame, its mighty wings flap in the dust, and it squirms and fidgets. At the time, I thought that I would have no real trouble fighting this creature. After all, I had mostly a squad of Mark's dwarves as well as my soldiers. I hoped that they could simply block its flame and kill it rather swiftly. I also assumed that it would stay in this cavern lair, where it has appeared. Due to there being stone all over the floor, nothing would really catch flame, and it would be difficult for the monster to ignite my dwarves because of their skills. Unfortunately, it just flew up through a hole in the ground and then proceeded to set all of the moss on fire, which is exactly the opposite of what I hoped would happen. And before I had the opportunity to lock the doors, it destroyed them and walked through the doors. It then quickly made its way up to the ground level of the fortress, nearby the hospital, and began torching anything that moved. But no matter if they're alive or dead, or unalive or undead, whatever they are, these dwarves will cease to exist if their flesh mech is deactivated and burned to a crisp. But every story has a hero, and in this case, it was the soldier known as Laia, who was dodging the creature down into the staircase, completely aflamed and bleeding to the point of almost running out of blood. Not that it mattered, of course, they were undead. They were able to dodge the creature, and the creature followed the dwarf into a corner, trapping itself, where it could become target practice for my Mark's dwarves. And a stray bullet popped the bubble of flame that was that beast, with a well-placed bolt. And the truly miraculous thing? An absolute miracle. There was so much blood on the floor, and muck and ichor from the creature, that it evaporated, extinguishing the flame on Lyagushka. Dwarf, you are the hero of brainrot, and perhaps you maybe even saved us. The population had fallen quite considerably as that fight came to an end, but at least the crab population was climbing. It took a while for me to actually come to grips with the scale of the death. Zon, the original religious leader, perished in the fighting, and I didn't even have time to mourn, because another forgotten beast has arrived. While significantly less scary, this beast bears an important reminder that still, no matter how strong I think that these dwarves are, we are still the greatest threat to ourselves. Because as the beast emerged from the stairs, the dwarves summoned nightmares. And those nightmares did more damage to the few remaining living creatures in the fortress than the beast did. After felling a gremlin and a dwarf, the beast fell quite swiftly, but my necromancer's nightmares ended the lives of 11 citizens of Brainrot. But we still had our soldiers, and we still had our wealth, so the dwarves patched up their wounds and continued forward. And just a week later, the dwarves of Colorbeard invaded, standing on the surface. But there wasn't many of them, and Brainrot still had 6 able-bodied warriors. I mean, most of them still have their hands, I think. I gave the orders to move them to the surface, and denied the parley, and immediately, chaos erupted. When fights like these happen, it becomes rapidly very difficult to even follow the violence. But due to the small scale, this certainly could have been much worse. The fight took place on two fronts, the north and south. Very quickly, the enemy dwarves were executed, and then turned into a repeating training match in the format of a zombified fleshy punching bag. And after a matter of minutes, the fighting calmed down. The 10 dwarves who attempted to attack Brainrot had either been turned into friendly undead or fled the scene, or mangled to the point of being unrecoverable, and the dwarves returned to their hospital beds. And remember how I said value? Well, turns out the fort is still famous and people still want to live here for some reason, so more migrants arrived. In fact, this migrant wave was so successful, it brought us from 18 dwarves all the way up to 41. This allowed me to get back to work. I dug out a large space to use as an incinerator for getting rid of trash. We had lots of it. It worked quite well, honestly. We gave the orders to re-enable the construction of beautification of the fortress. The zombies didn't mind so much, but the currently living ones did. As time passed on, more migrants would arrive, and trading happened once more, bringing the population back up to above 50. And quite frankly, that won't do, as some of the living dwarves find the sight of dwarves such as Lanix the Handy a little bit distressing. So, best fire up the resurrection chambers. Much better. Just the silent moaning of the dead, much less complaining of the living. But we've still got more dwarves that need to be resurrected, and also more threats that need to be quelled. I'll start by saying that we had time in the interim to increase the size of my military, and it seems the dwarves of Colorbeard also tried to increase their military, because they attacked us on mounts, and with better gear and in higher numbers. And so I did the only logical thing I could. I sent the squads to the surface. Immediately nightmares appeared, and chaos ensued. And if the last fight was hard to follow, this one is going to be significantly worse. Between the horses running everywhere, smoke from the summoned and then despawning nightmares, and just the amount of blood and viscera flying around, I kind of gave up. The necromancers were gesturing and making things dizzy and causing them to fall over. I even saw horses kick dwarves off their back once they became dizzy. But eventually, things began to calm down, and we could look at the result. These are all friendly rotten butchers who died during the fighting. The reason sometimes necromancers create friendly undead is because when an intelligent creature dies, there is a chance that they either join you or stay neutral. If they're a hostile entity or something from another faction that decides to join you, they don't actually join the fortress and just stand around as a friendly unnamed entity. So now we have this army of guard dogs that will actually defend the fortress against anything hostile, meaning those vultures from way back when are going to have a much harder time causing some troubles in this fortress. They'll just simply be stunned at the edge of the map, drop down, and then murdered by these zombies. Excellent. Now, there probably was something more productive I was doing, but honestly, I can't remember what it was. So instead, let's just make more zombies. And patch up the wounded. And to my surprise, more migrants arrived. I'm honestly just kind of at a loss for words at this point. And the population rose to 81. This was the most successful that Brainrot had ever been. Potentially, ever would be. Well, best starve them to death and resurrect them. Whether by magic, skill, talent, or just plain hubris. My military prowess was unmatched. No foe stood a chance to even put a dent in my almost unbreakable wall of defense. It was time to go deeper. We needed better weapons, and the dwarves needed to meet their god. I sealed off the surface and moved down to the lower levels, and constructed a barracks just south of that mysterious wall studded with gems, because contained in that wall was adamantine. And God, could you stop invading me? I just want to dig some adamantine. Okay, fine. Have it your way. Back to the important stuff. The dwarves dug deeper, chiseling away at the diamonds and valuable gems found deep below. Because it was inevitable, they would find their doom. The dwarves could hear the whispering beneath the stones as they took full advantage of the adamantine. Horrifying screams come from the darkness below. A torrent of cold, infernal air rushed into the fortress. The dwarves could feel it. They'd already prepared a first line of defense of cobras and giant crabs. And as the denizens of the underworld erupted into the base of the fortress, the dwarves of Brainrot braced for impact. But there was just too many of them. And no matter what the dwarves did, they were outnumbered. The great lich Moreb of the Gilded Monks fought valiantly, coated in armor of adamantine, slaying many of the demons. But even for a dwarf with skills such as this, they succumbed to the great underworld. I'd say that they died, but did they really? I mean, they may have died multiple times already at this point. Because they'd already been dead for so long, their souls would quickly leave their bodies and become ghosts. And all they could do is stand and watch as the demons from down below consumed the lower levels of the fortress. The few remaining soldiers held the line, but with the smoke and steam and dust, there was only so much they could do. The ghosts tried to help, I'm sure, but quickly gave up because they're ghosts and can't touch things. While all may be lost, some of the dwarves wanted a last laugh and began flooding the center levels of the fortress with lava and water. They didn't want the place to be habitable by any living soul ever again. The dwarves fought at all levels of the fortress, between demons and undead crundles, and mistakes of their own creation. Bismuth was a hero in this regard, slaying several of the fire-breathing banshees, before once again becoming distracted by the zombified crundles. Because there would always be more demons, and Bismuth knew this, and was prepared to fight until their last fingernail disintegrates. You can break the body of a rotten butcher, but you will never break their spirit. It would be some time before the fighting in brainrot would come to an end. And as Bismuth stood victory down below, a vile force of darkness had arrived? Like, what's wrong with you? I'm not even sure who killed them. I think it was just the zombies on the surface because they never even made it in the front door. Good luck, I suppose. But miraculously, things became quiet, and the dwarves scouted the fortress, and eventually moved back down to the lower layers. The fortress was filling with water and lava, but they had defeated the initial wave of entities from the underworld. And as the final few remaining soldiers stood, and the specters of their fathers and friends and families watched on, the few remaining citizens of Brainrot, dwarves if you could call them that, decided that they were ready to meet their god. And maybe in 1,000 years, when things become quiet, they'll venture back to the surface and reclaim the world as it was rightly theirs. Wait, more migrants? Are you kidding me?
I don't... Bye.